so my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of a human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean...
All right, my friends. Happy Friday. I am Erica Lukes here with UFO Classified. I've been faithfully doing UFO Classified with the support of some very dear people for 6 years now. And almost every Friday night I have spent that with my friends from all over the world, people who have questions, people who've had experiences, and people who want to know the truth and deserve the truth. It is such a great honor and privilege for me to get into chat and to see people there asking wonderful questions, being respectful, and I don't know what I would do without all of you. So a big shout out to the people that help me and who help me keep the show on the air. It is really wonderful. But not only that, to help me acquire and preserve archives that are of an incredible importance to the subject. As you know, because I talk about this so much, I have had the fortune of coming into possession, thanks to Gordon Lohr and the Drufel family and Drufel's archives, and this is such an expansive collection. Every day I am in there, every day I am archiving, digitizing things, and I come across another wonderful piece of the puzzle that has helped further me so much in my own research, and I'm doing that with your help. So I want to give just again a big thank you and a shout out to all of the people who help me and who get in here and just have great conversations, like I said. So last week's show obviously was a wee bit controversial, as kind of that's my bag, I suppose. Because I have been in this subject and interacted with people and seen things that to me are very alarming. And I feel that it is my duty as a human being and as somebody who is in the public eye to call things out, to draw things to people's attention. And Phil Leach, my guest last week, mentioned Michael Hull and his Facebook videos and posts where he was at the Capitol insurrection and standing next to the Proud Boys, which he has a post for that on his social media. So he was very aware of that. And to me, that is when we saw the destruction and the mindset of the people there. I've always looked into the UFO community to see what people who are supposed leaders in the field are doing, and lo and behold, as I dig, I'm finding people that are involved in high-up positions of organizations, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, who are also posting things, and this was a woman who posted on January 8th, this was her post, "The synagogue of Satan has blinded the eyes of the weak in Christ. Sad news for them, but they will be held accountable." That is just one of the posts, talking with this just hate and vitriol, and then also talking, other people in the community in high-up positions are talking about not masking and how the virus is a hoax, and basically saying, keeping the rhetoric going, threatening people's lives, threatening more violence. And at some point in time, organizations like MUFON and people who are in the UFO community need to get seriously called out. We need to do this together. And I also want for us to take a moment and reflect on shows like Coast to Coast AM, which I used to love listening to. There have been some great guests, but as you go back, you notice that, lo and behold, who are they giving airtime to? How about Roger Stone? How about Stuart Rhodes, who is the head of the Oath Keepers, which is an American far-right anti-government militia composed of current and former military members who pledged to defend the Constitution against all enemies, and some of whom were indicted on charges. The Proud Boys, again, a far-right neo-fascist male white nationalist organization that promotes and engages in political violence. So those are the Proud Boys. Yay. But we are listening to things year after year after year. We're getting told these wonderful UFO stories, but then something a little bit more insidious is inserted into that narrative. And then pretty soon you've got people who are talking about these wonderful, miraculous cures for things. And no doubt people are getting paid, marketing money to promote these things, but things that have no known, they haven't been studied. We're saying a virus that is killing people and affecting people that I know, that's a hoax and we shouldn't wear masks, and then promoting this violence and anti-Semitism. And it's like, holy cow, I just think we have to wake up. We have a responsibility in the UFO community to say that things like this are not acceptable, that organizations that support this type of behavior without even blinking an eye, they again need to be held accountable. I could name some names that are liking certain comments on pages, and then we've got another person saying storm clouds are forming, get ready because we're gonna play us a real mean cowboy and a nasty game of cowboys and leftists. That's the kind of crap that we're seeing. So anyway, we have a responsibility to stand up to that, and if the people at MUFON care to make a statement, that is wonderful. I'm sure they will continue to do the MUFON sidestep because they know that the heads of the organization, the mouthpieces of the organization, are clearly engaging in racist and very dangerous behavior. So there you have that. Now, with that in mind, I just want to tell you that, again, I want to go back to something happy and cool. I was going to have MJ Benias on the show. He had agreed earlier in the week to come on, and then he said that he was busy and couldn't make it happen. He was going to get back to me with the schedule, but I have not heard back from him. So hopefully at some point in time, MJ will come on the show, because I do have some questions about the debrief, about some of the articles, and specifically articles that he has published about Skinwalker Ranch. And some things that I have questions on, so we'll get him on here. But back to the wonderful Drufel files. Like I said, I wish you could be there. I'm going to take some videos of the archive and me looking through files. I wish you could be there as I was opening things and looking at these correspondence for the first time and discovering people that I never even knew about. People that have done important work and were often working behind the scenes to give out information, to give leads, and to help either spread disinformation or to help promote the truth. One of the people that I came across, which has just been absolutely fascinating to me, is a fellow by the name of James T Westwood. I spoke with a couple researchers who knew him and had conversed with him over the years, met him, and they described him as, just a very kind of a gruff, determined individual who was a professional. And as a professional for his areas of expertise, he did charge money to collect information. And he was very matter of fact about that, very proud of that, and said, in what profession would we not be charging money to collect information? And you know what, when you do spend as much time doing things, I can completely agree with him on that, because you just have to have money coming in to cover your expenses. So that is that. But James T. Westwood, and I'm going to read you this because this is interesting. I picked up this file not knowing really who he was, and I saw a correspondence from him. He used to use the typewriter and would not communicate on the internet. It is dated 10/15 of 96. And I figured correctly, as it turned out, that I wouldn't hear much from you once you realize that I'm not an amateur, but rather professional, experienced, accomplished, technical business person who buys and sells labor and expertise, whether about UFOs, ballistic missiles, airplanes, command and control systems, or whatever. Sorry, but that's how it works in the business world, Anne. What's wrong with ufology is that it's always been an amateur hour undertaking that anyone can sign up for and perform. The competent, the strap hangers, the axe grinders, the professionals, anyone at all. And that may sound harsh, but after reading more and more of these amazing correspondence between Anne and between James, it was very apparent that he had something very important, and he had a grounded approach with regard to doing his work. He wasn't going to say something was genuine when in fact he knew that there were questions about it. In another correspondence, which is dated Friday, March 15th, 2002, he says, Dear Ms. Drufel, because MSDA, which stands for Military Science and Defense Analytics, investigates for its clients cases of official and private deception and disinformation in ufology, we recently purchased a back issue of Fate of April 1991 so as to see the article there entitled Ufology's Mr. Controversy. Based on the work I have done over the last few years, I note that your article is generally faithful and reliably accurate, according to understanding that of others 12 years ago. I am aware that Moore, speaking about Bill Moore here in recent years, goes around and hides out in Burbank, California. All I can say to you is that Biker Bill Moore was thoroughly and badly rolled out by Falcon Rick Doty. There is no other Falcon except Doty, unless one traces back to the original El Halcon, the intimidable G. Gordon Liddy, excuse me if I could speak English tonight, it's never a dull moment. There was never a real aviary in the sense of an official, if also clandestine body of government officials and strap hangers. The former KGB of the former Soviet Union was feeding the U.S. intelligence agencies UFO-based disinformation as early as 1968, probably even earlier. In the Air Force, Sergeant Doty and many other professionals practiced what they called special planning as concerned American and foreign ufology. Deception and disinformation routinely are integral to total security surrounding extremely sensitive projects and programs, including major hardware, and in parentheses it says not UFO hardware, programs that are intended to promote and create American national security strengths and advanced technologies intended to keep all Americans reasonably safe and secure, even when we are attacked on our own soil by terrorists, hijacked airliners. National security is not free. Sincerely, James Westwood. And those were the first two correspondence I read, and this was just a couple days ago. And then as I look through this folder, I am, like I said, seeing more and more, and seeing the mutual affection and respect between Anne and between Westwood, and then reading some of the papers that he put forward, and my, I've just got to grab this and share this with you, because some of his research is absolutely incredible. One paper was entitled Soviet Military Psi Research, and in that, obviously, we're talking about Russia, and interestingly enough, it mentions 1973, and Stanford Research Institute. My, how interesting. Stanford comes up time and time again with regard to the quote-unquote remote viewing program. And then also Stanford University was also one of the places chosen for the MK Ultra program, which is also interesting. And as we know, and I've stated before, we do have on record that MK Ultra, unfortunately, that lovely program where we were experimenting on people without consent, using hypnosis, using hallucinogens and many other things, but we also note that Sidney Gottlieb, the father of MK Ultra, was also one of the first people who funded Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff. What are the connections? We don't know, but we'll certainly find out. So here we've got that paper, and then another paper by James T. Westwood about airborne reconnaissance and UFO military intelligence. Again, just an incredible paper. How do we know it's true? The problems of authenticity in UFO research. Does the U.S. military intelligence care about UFOs? Why do the lights go out? It goes on and on and on. And it is so cool. So anyway, tonight I'm going to be reading two of his papers, because I just think this is just far out, and you guys are going to have to let me know in chat what you think of these papers. And then also, because this is a show, again, dedicated to Anne Drufel and her wonderful collection, I will be playing a portion of an interview that she did with Bill Moore about her book Firestorm. And it is fascinating to hear some of the things that come up in conversation that I am so grateful she captured. So stick around. It's going to be a wonderful night. Again, I want to thank all of you in chat. You can go to UFOclassified.com to show your support. I want to thank Sue. I want to thank Scott for your beautiful artwork. Thank you, Scott, for being here, and Bruce Cornett, all of the people that contribute. I love you guys. Thank you. And Steve, it is so cool. I also want to say that I will be, and I'm in the process of scanning certain documents that I'm talking about on my show, which will be available for my show Patreons. So we can look forward to that. Let me give you a little bit more information now about James Westwood. 33 years of professional experience as U.S. military officer. He was self-employed as a technical consultant, published author and editor, university instructor and senior analyst, principal investigator and task leader in the U.S. government contracting corporations. He is the recipient of numerous military decorations, civilian awards, and bonuses. And is listed in the Who's Who in the South and Southwest, 1993-94, Defense Department top secret security clearance. And his known areas of expertise, this goes on 4 or 5 pages, but just some of these things: operations, research, management, science, modeling and predicting, personal, physical, and systems securities, electronic warfare, counterintelligence. He also did a lot of research, as I mentioned, with regard to Russia, planned and managed Navy cryptologic operations, achieving highest consistent performance record of all such operations in the Atlantic Fleet for a 2-year period. Like I said, it goes on and on and on, but what an interesting man. And according to a couple of the researchers that I spoke with about him, who had years of contact with him, again, he was who he says he was, and he was trying to get out information to people so they had what he felt was the truth with regard to this, and kind of eliminating some of the disinformation that we see. So now, without further ado, I am going to play a recording of one of the articles, one of the papers that he wrote, entitled "How Do We Know It's True?" How do we know It's True, The Problem of Authenticity in UFO Research by James T. Westwood. As with many controversial subjects, UFO research is permeated at all points by the pervasive problem of the authenticity of variously sourced accounts, i.e. the genuineness of the data to be used for interpreting and predicting the UFO phenomenon. Documents, witness reports, media publications, photography, and other imagery, and physical evidence abound, but much of this is second to many-handed, of suspicious origin and prospect, and of kinds of data and evidence fairly easily faked or contrived. How indeed do serious investigators, writers, scholars ascertain that any given piece of this evidentiary and other material is genuine, hoaxed, or some of each? Since the earliest of days of the post-World War II interest in UFOs, the problem of authenticity has haunted the UFO community, and it is not a problem that is going to go away by itself. For example, in their article in August of 1994 issue of Omni, authors Dennis Stacy and Patrick Hugh cite one researcher's dilemma in authenticating a U.S. Defense Department DSP satellite monitoring of a so-called fast walker event seen in IR imagery on May 5, 1984. Fast walker is the official nickname for objects detected in the space around Earth that maneuver in ways compatible with various flight profiles of ballistic missiles, but otherwise cannot be explained or identified as ballistic missiles. In another more scholarly example, the problem of authenticating UFO experiences bothered Hendry in the definitive The UFO Handbook, Guide to Investigating, Evaluating, and Reporting UFO Sightings from 1979, where the author writes, "Do eyewitness statements represent accurate portrayals? Further, do physical traces of UFOs constitute evidence? Finally, where we are at the mercy of anyone with a UFO story to tell, unable to prove or disprove it, how familiar this dilemma, this lament, is to UFO researchers." Authenticity is the key concern of the well-known UFO researcher and author Stanton Friedman. In his exquisite 1990 report for the Fund for UFO Research entitled Final Report on the Operation Majestic 12, this is a 59-page analysis with numerous referenced and appendices for the purpose of which is to determine whether or not the now famous November 18, 1952 Eisenhower Briefing document on the MJ-12 organization and operation of the late 1940s and early 1950s is authentic, genuine U.S. government document. Mr. Friedman's analysis was necessitated by the fact that the initial copy of the document seen in the UFO community appeared to have been clandestinely leaked, and the source of that infusion could not be traced. Having been faced recently with similar authenticity problem to that one, the present author, who was compelled by circumstance to consider how it is that authentication in UFO research can be carried out reliably with peer and sponsor client confidence in the results, whether those results are pro or con. The problem is, after all, a pernicious, wanna-dry, boring subject to some, but essential and necessary one to others in the business of investigating and reporting the UFO phenomenon. First, one needs to think about the surplus of media and publication accounts, newspaper, magazine, book and television commentaries, articles, and specials that abound and concern the matter of UFO sightings, abductions, maneuvers, and government cover-ups, conspiracies, and officialdom's involvement with UFOs, and of media productions of conjectures, hypotheses, and some nascent theories of how UFOs and extra-biological entities work and act. How does a serious student of ufology verify this barrage of published, broadcasted material? Apart from their personal objectivity and integrity, all journalists, editors, radio and television commentators and producers routinely confront space, relevancy, and deadline constraints that sharply delimit and circumscribe the eventual publications and broadcasts. The published product almost always is smaller, less detailed, and more generalized than was the collection of sources, data, presentation forecast, and intention. Except by chance, journalists and popular book and magazine authors are not scholars devoted to explaining, tracking, tracing, appraising, and running down and drawing out every last line of questioning and implication. Should they do that, they would be writing scholarly literature and producing hours-long broadcasts which would appeal but to a very small audience itself, as meticulous and tedious as our imagery journalists turned scholars. Except as it is provides first-hand accounts accurately and completely given or recreated. This significantly large part of UFO information and data comprise so-called secondary material or secondary sources. The authenticity and accuracy of primary, e.g. first-hand account sources, is itself often problematic and is more so than the fidelity and authenticity of secondary sources much featured in the popular press and media. Nearly a generation ago, in his introduction to the Lorenzens Flying Saucer Occupants from 1967, then Utah State University scientist and department head Frank B. Salisbury put this primary versus secondary source problem into practical perspective when he wrote that one has but two choices in researching the UFO phenomenon. One, try to set up and experience close encounters of one's own, or two, study the available accounts. That is, one becomes a primary source, or one absorbs and reflects indirectly secondary sources of UFO information. In terms of rigorously authenticating UFO media material, it is imperative to distinguish at all times between primary and secondary source material that are put forth in the public domain, and to be aware that the media accounts are truncated and shaped to fit within certain closely managed dimensions. To illustrate the difference in how primary and secondary sources should be used in UFO research, consider a nominal historian of the American Civil War who typically would consult newspaper reports of the period 1861 to 1865 for general background, flavor, continuity, but to establish and faithfully recreate that such and such actually happened at a specified time and place would consult, for example, soldiers' letters, military unit records, topographical models, government records, diplomatic messages, and the like. In fact, it is a main function of a secondary sources as found in media and popular literature to smooth out and to perceptively average the peaks and troughs of primary data that populate a field of interest and research. In UFO and other research, this does not mean that all primary sources are accurate, complete, and genuine, and all secondary sources, i.e. accounts of other accounts, are flawed. There are several celebrated cases of hoaxed primary sources. The main virtue of a primary source of data about UFO phenomenology is that they stand or fall upon their own inherent merits rather than what second, third, and greater sources say about them. We come next to the problem of authenticating personal accounts in the study of UFOs. The first are first-person direct eyewitness accounts. Whether they are only spoken or also recorded, they have a flavor of, I saw a UFO in flight, hovering, landed, I had contact with an alien, EBE, I was kidnapped or taken prisoner by the EBEs, I worked in a government organization where I saw and read official documents about the organization's involvement with UFOs and EBEs. To the extent that personal accounts are neither fabricated nor hallucinated, they make reliable, dependable data for UFO research. It does not matter that they are anecdotal because all data are anecdotal. It is the job of the investigator, the analyst, and the reporter to find patterns and meaning in such data in order that UFO phenomena may be interpreted and predicted. It is the job of a researcher to reduce personal accounts data to its relevant base by stripping it of hearsay, hyperbole, and errors. The chief problem in authenticating personnel or witness accounts about UFOs is in the ease with which they may be falsified, inflated, or shaped by the witness into that which the witness assumes the analyst, or interviewer wants to hear. That is, such accounts should be expected to be skewed, though it is seldom that they will be total fabrication. Corroboration is the time-tested means by authenticating personal UFO accounts, and this includes verification of the witness's credentials, circumstances, and identity. The best authentication are other witnesses with largely the same experiences in the same times and places. With respect to reducing distortions of this data, it is necessary to question the motives, means, and opportunities of personal witnesses to commit fraud. For example, if a first-hand UFO witness is found to have means to defraud, but neither the motive nor the opportunity to defraud, then the account is likely authentic. That anything could happen does not mean that it actually did. In collecting from all sources of UFO data and information, the researcher should keep in mind a kind of legal dictum which asserts that it is difficult enough to prove what did happen without also trying to prove what did not happen. Finally, we come to the problem of authenticating documents connected with the study of UFOs, documents that typically include the official and informal documents of governments. A foremost example of such documents is the Eisenhower Briefing document about MJ-12 operations that is cited in the early part of this article. In the conclusion of his study, Mr. Friedman finds, after a long, painstaking period of research and analysis, no reason to believe that the Eisenhower Briefing and two related documents, the Cutler-Twining Memorandum of July 14, 1954, and the Truman-Forrestal Memorandum of September 24, 1947, are other than authentic. It should be noted that this is not quite the same thing as a blanket finding that such documents are genuine. It is a reservation taken by many experts testifying in court and otherwise. A wise reservation indeed in any case where only a photographic copy of a document is available and has been studied. Illustrating the problems and issues in authenticating documents, the 1990 Friedman Report makes other important observations. The burden of proof is naturally upon any assertion that a given document is a forgery, and that a committed researcher will find repeatedly and usually variations on normal patterns and procedures of composing, formatting, and otherwise producing documents. In point of fact, the careful UFO researcher should be alarmed by the total uniformity of data, which may create the impression that the material is often too perfect and therefore potentially a deception. The only UFO data that are not noisy are data that already have been reduced and normalized by research and analysis. The procedures, prospects, and problems of authenticating both documentary and personal UFO materials is difficult, inexact, labor-intensive, technologically dependent, and expensive. For those reasons, it is sometimes little or not done. Because of the several costs of authenticating these sources, it is not surprising nor necessarily disdaining of UFO researchers that authentication falls short. There is another problem here as well. Unlike authenticating financial documents or articles of money, authenticating UFO documents also carries with it a kind of impeding ideological belief system component in a matter closely akin to authenticating the books of the Holy Bible of Christianity. What does this mean? As an example, this work of Professor Morton Smith during 1958 to 1973, when he had discovered an ancient and secondary historical source document pointing to a second or alternative Gospel of Mark, a secret and esoteric version produced by Mark for controlled distribution, restricted only to initiates into the mysteries of Jesus Christ among the earliest Christians. The critical document that Smith discovered in a Judean monastery in 1958 was a script's copy of a first-century Clementine letter wherein Clement describes and references an alternate secret Markan Gospel, otherwise never available to the now great body of Christianity. In his book on this remarkable discovery, Professor Smith describes the classical problems of authenticating biblical documents in a way that is highly problematic of authenticating UFO documents and their copies. He tells he now has copied a handwritten copy that he discovered. Photographing manuscripts is a very tricky business, especially when the camera has to be held by hand. Including the fact that a certain government originated UFO documents, like the Eisenhower Briefing, have been anonymously leaked to the UFO community as rolls of handheld photographic negative films, which when printed revealed copies of the documents. The similarities of UFO documents with biblical documents research is a close, compelling one. Each of the two fields of research are equally characterized by ardent ideologies, esotericism, fantastic personal experiences, Gnostic knowledge and belief systems. Both fields are staffed by scientifically motivated researchers, ardent believers, skeptics, detractors, and debunkers. Because documents are records, the very essence of history per se, are relatively easy to forge, and, being inanimate, cannot be assailed or questioned in real time. They are of special and continuing interest to UFO researchers, particularly as they may be shown to be ingenuine. Given suspicions that one or more governments may have concocted UFO cover-ups buttressed by disinformation operations, many UFO researchers and editors are rightly wary of alleged government documents, whether obtained straightforwardly by request of researchers or, especially those interested or inserted anonymously into UFO research communities. In practice, how should any UFO-related document be authenticated? Perhaps the best first rule is not to jump to conclusions, because there are many methods and techniques of forging fraudulent documents. In no way means that a given document is a fake, even in areas where fakery has a great impact. Opportunity and motive to commit fraud also must be shown, and even then, there are major hurdles because of the burden of proof of forgery or deception is not on the questioned document nor upon its producer, but rather upon those who would allege forgery. A second rule in authenticating UFO documents is to be prepared to find that a given document is either a fake or an unwitting mistake. An essential part of a meaningful research process is to eliminate alternative explanations. A next and fundamental step is to compare questionable documents with similar documents previously shown to be both genuine and forged, provided that these samples exist. This double exposure allows the use of a contrasting template that is a crucial step in authenticating documents, a step not to be shortchanged, however, if similar but forged documents are not available. Then the style and content of the questionable document must be compared with a similar, genuine document, and this one-sided comparison and its results made explicit. Keep in mind that the burden is not upon the document and its authors, whether identified or not, to prove itself genuine. Early in the process of authenticating documents, they should be subjected to rigorous peer examination. Often this is not done by UFO researchers, though it is common practice in other fields, including biblical research. Nothing can be more damaging to the true basis of a researcher's prestige than to be subsequently embarrassed before his or her peers for making foolish, vain errors of commission. It also should be kept firmly in mind that just because the contents and implications of a UFO document are exciting and have the portent of pure attribution, in this adrenaline rush has actually nothing to do with the exciting document's genuineness. Indeed, an exhilarating document can be a pivotal foil for the forger. Researchers and devotees frequently suppress their own critical faculties while blaming others for not exercising those same discernments. In this self-control, one should be reminded of the classic case, such as the French document forger, Ron Denis Lucas, who sold to an overly vain collector a batch of forged documents that included a letter written by Mary Magdalene on French paper, made in France. It is not feasible to fully authenticate a document when having at hand only a photographic reproduction of the document, even when the reproduction purports to be a first copy. Recent, in the last 5 years or so, advances in computer graphics technology allows a forger to produce a fake historical document that has all the earmarks and characteristics of an older style and method of printing and publication. Given that a forger has at hand even a good copy of a genuine government document of any subject that actually was printed circa 1950 using contemporary graphics software, the forger can compose and print circa 1994 a fallacious historical appearing document on the same or different subject. When the forged printed document is then copied photographically, the copy can mislead even a person intimately familiar with the earlier printings, styles, and methods. Such an expert presented with the original printed forgery would quickly discern that fakery, but on the photocopy would see only a familiar historic typeface or format, even where the subject of faked documents, not UFOs. Copyrighted software such as Quark Press, Fontographer, Fontmonger, and Font Chameleon could be used by a forger today to fabricate a government UFO document in the finest style, character, and format of a government manual or typewriter-written letter of the 1950s, 1960s, etc., provided that the forger had on hand an actual such document from the era to emulate by use of graphic software. Also, such forgery could be created through the use of working printing equipment and supplies of the 1950s, and the use of now truly old paper that is still available. It should be noted that such equipment, supplies, and paper were widely used privately and in commerce a generation or so ago, and there is no telling where all these things are today that might be available to a forger of government or other UFO documents. A key technique used in authenticating documents is the examination and testing of paper or other stratum upon which the document is printed or written. While forgers can artificially age the paper of documents, experts, document examiners usually can discern this. Another forging measure is to graphically lift officials' signatures from genuine documents and transpose these signatures to bogus documents. Forgers can also obtain supplies of old printing and typing paper, including that in use by governments half a century or less in the past. Having only photocopies of interesting but questionable UFO documents precludes significant tests in the authenticator's art. It precludes the standard use of chemical tests, for example, the use of acetone that will dissolve surface-laid plastic print but will not dissolve print impressed on paper by conventional printing press machines. Having only photocopies to study precludes the use of ultraviolet and infrared light tests done to reveal any alterations, erasures, or overwritings, and to read through sealed envelopes. Document forgers are well aware of the limits imposed on authentication procedures in the case of photocopies of documents dealing with highly stimulating, controversial subjects. In no way does this mean that all such documents are probably faked. In spite of the advantages that accrue to forgers who also would anonymously lay out the bait for photocopies of tantalizing government UFO documents, UFO researchers retain some advantages as well. Forging documents, unless they are very short and sweet, is an expensive, complicated proposition. Therefore, the ends should justify the means. Moreover, the lack of an original document does not rule out all the conventional techniques of verification and authentication. Most importantly, having only photocopy permits style and content analysis, as well as the analysis of printing and writing faces and fonts. As applied to ancient and medieval documents, the latter is properly called paleography. Paleography is used to approximate the date of very old documents, and techniques applicable to modern and printed document identification and authentication. Yet another method by which experts authenticate documents is by analysis called chronology. This involves tests of whether and to what extent the questioned documents violate chronological, historical, and even technological contexts and sequences. Here, the authenticator should not be overly rigid or binary. For example, to read in a document about a certain technology not known to have existed at the time to which the document is dated is not ipso facto a valid reason to label a document a forgery, provided that the idea of the concept of such technology was known or widespread at the time. In the end, there are no substitutes for style and content analysis in the process of authenticating UFO documents. Basic to this effort is the comparison of a questioned document to a genuine document by the same author or publisher and his or her peers. The genuine document should be of nearly or exactly the same period and place as the questioned document seems to be. Some variation or leeway in these parameters will not invalidate the process. Style comparison is largely a subjective matter and a judgment call. Content comparative analysis tends to be more objective. It includes word counting, grammar comparison, the comparison of language preferences, and language use of particular interest in content analysis are terms and forms of reference and of models. Authenticators of UFO documents should not be discouraged nor dissuaded by what Friedman calls variations on the normal. These can include unusual or unexpected forms of language and format, certain chronological irregularities, the absence of expected syntax and jargon, and so forth. A suspicious document that looks entirely too much as it should look, were it authentic, must be subjected to the most rigorous scrutiny. And at the very end of footnote, this author is indebted to the colleague Thomas Dooley, United States Navy, retired, for Commander Dooley's advice on contemporary automated forging possibilities, and to the author's clients and sponsors who graciously support his work. Okay, so there you have it. That was very wordy. Let me tell you, it's been an exciting day there. But this was just, again, like I said, one example of a paper written by James T. Westwood. I opened the files, a couple days ago, and it absolutely blew my mind, because here was somebody who, obviously it looks, given his background, that he is the real deal. And then he was also interested in this. He was also paid to do research, to collect information that he was very proud of. And from what I understand from the people I've talked to, he was very grounded and logical and did not want to give credence to something that could not be verified. And so I really appreciate that. And Bill, I know I just got loud because this isn't a recording, but I just had recorded some other things. And so now I'm going to, since the sound is a little bit interesting with my recordings, I'm actually going to do a little reading here of another thing that I had mentioned, which is Soviet military psi research. And I had kind of thrown that out there earlier with regard to Stanford research, and I think that this is really interesting because of the connections with the Soviet Union and some of these things. And so in this report here, in this paper, it says, as practicing Sovietologist in Kremlin guesser for 25 years, from 1965 to 1990, I first became interested in 74 in Soviet research and development in parapsychology and psi. The 23rd letter of the Greek alphabet pronounced like psi and used to connote paranormal behavior and phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis that are not readily explainable by known natural laws, particularly that with military applications and purposes under the rubric of psychic warfare. Even at the time, I understood that in general Soviet science was and remains long on theory and rhetoric and short on technological carry-through applications. This was and is state of the affairs, even though almost all Soviet scientific technical resources have been devoted to engineering, so-called sectoral science, since the early 1930s. Also, I understand, and still do, that the entire Soviet economy is pronouncedly biased in the direction of military R&D, military force structure and modernization, and military industrial capacities, and has been since 1937. From the time the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia in 1917 to 18, more certainly since 1925 to 26, there was an overriding political impetus in the USSR to bend science to political wills and political ends. And the economics of Soviet science were subordinated to political goals and plans. To the extent that Soviet R&D had been robust and creative, it has been so where military benefits were seen to obtain. The public record shows that U.S. intelligence organizations became concerned about Soviet military-related psi activities around 1973, some 10 years after the Soviets started to resource and conduct such activity in a serious systemic manner based on a Kremlin decree responding to the General Staff and KGB requirements. There is some evidence that those Soviet authorities feared what in 1984 columnist Jack Anderson called the quote-unquote voodoo gap, the American intelligence interest in what Soviets were doing in psi military research and also in how psi might enhance U.S. military capabilities continued. A pace for more than a decade and well into the 1980s. According to one journalism source, in 1973, the CIA and the NSA sent representatives to a psi demonstration given by the Defense Department and the CIA's contractor for psi research, the Stanford Research Institute of Menlo Park, California. The SRI continued this research to at least 1989, perhaps beyond, at a laboratory in Fairfax, Virginia, was used by an employment opportunity notice for physics that appeared in Washington Post classified advertisements, and this was in a very unobtrusive print in 1989. Even though ascertaining Soviet military budgets and expenditures is an even more inept science than is the investigation of Fortean phenomena, reports of the 1980s suggested that the USSR spent 5 times as much as the USA on psychic research and development. Not completely surprising, my assessment and that of other experts is that the comparative results of both countries' psi research are roughly even. In both cases, there were some promising and substantiated results, a lot of uneven results, and some clearly outlandish outcomes. Officially, Soviet military parapsychologist research programs kicked off on January 1st, 1961, the beginning date of the 7th USSR National 5-Year Plan, the single planning, resourcing, and monitoring mechanism that, through the collapse of 1989-90, literally governed and controlled the Soviet economy, including all scientific and military activity of all kinds and manners. Though I agree firmly and fortunately that Canadian psychologist James Addock that scientists predefine chance in models and experiments, and that accordingly statistical conclusions cannot say anything at all about the existence or non-existence of psi or psychic phenomena. I performed in July 1988 a simple statistical analysis of Soviet psi research by measuring publications in the field. I wanted to gauge the level of effort and assess the degree of systemic exploration and purpose of Soviet work, perhaps because I'm a natural skeptic, especially where government policy and direction and funding are concerned, as they were in this area in both the U.S. and the USSR. Not much to my surprise, I found that Soviet psi R&D indeed was consistent and systematic across at least 5 successive Soviet FYP periods from 61 to 65, 66 to 70, 71 to 75, 76 to 80, 1981 to 1985. Data analysis showed a somewhat erratic and prolonged excessive startup, as one might expect from a reactive national security perspective, which leveled off subsequently to a prolonged, repetitive pattern of activity and outputs in the form of reports and methods and results, many of which were hyperbolic after the general fashion of Soviet claims and achievements and promises. I have long averaged that the Soviets have lied to each other for so long about so much that they no longer know baseline truth. It is in this data and lack of accuracy and some comprehensiveness in information which greatly accounts for the recent demise of the Soviet system, i.e. system adjustments for survival require full and accurate feedback data, and that is missing in the Soviet system. So he also goes on to state, and I won't read the whole thing because this is just fascinating, but he also says that in point of fact that Soviet political scientific interest in parapsychology goes back several decades, and though unevenly before 1968, American interest in Soviet work, particularly American national security interests, were sparked by the appearance in 1970 of Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder's signal work, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain, from Bantam Books and Prentice Hall in 1978. This book went through 17 printings and hard and soft covers, additionally from 1978 to 1988. And there was also the engineer physicist Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden of Huntsville, Alabama, studied and wrote about and briefed Soviet Psy-War research and likely results. So I'm going to be researching this, looking a little bit more into some of this, but it is very curious. And I'm going to skip to the second to last page, where he is talking about in July 6th, 1991, an issue of Pravda Ukraini, which is Ukrainian Truth, the Communist Party of the Ukraine Daily newspaper, reports that research from Crimea physicist Valery Tishenko into ball lightning, a classically favorite Fortean phenomena, and he speculates the ball lightning may be a sentient intelligent and thinks that his research can shed light on other phenomena which science cannot explain at the present. So again, I just want to say this, that you've got that we're throwing in this sentient intelligent being, which we've heard John Alexander talk about so much. It also goes on to say that in the last 3 years, there has been an apparent surge of Soviet research into psi and other Fortean phenomena. I use the word apparent purposefully to imply that Glasnost may have liberated reporting of a high level of research that would otherwise have continued unreported in Soviet media. I also offer that perestroika, though policy one of remodeling more recently and actually restructuring, has displaced and disoriented some Soviet scientific organizations and their scientists, such as those displaced resources have turned to research and development in non-traditional, non-mainline, quote-unquote, borderland fields of inquiry, which psi and other paranormal phenomena are leading candidates for resources being dislocated from traditional defense-related programs. Such a reorientation of Soviet science would not necessarily be a further loss to and debilitation of science in the USSR or in the world at large. It could result in more attention being given to the investigation and understanding of Fortean phenomena from which the world at large could benefit. It would be a wry turn of events where breakthroughs in Forteania to eventually come from the former communist camp. And so he, again, goes on, and this is a rather lengthy article, as they are research paper, as they all are, but he does mention, given the opportunity for increased resourcing of scientific research into psi and other Fortea, just forgive me, you guys, you love me, I know it, in the Soviet Union, that I've suggested it is important to watch this field very closely over the coming years to better understand what their specific fields of interest are. In the course of my own research over the last 17 years, I've accumulated a relatively modest file of cuttings, books, papers, and references of the subject of Soviet psi research and Psy-War. Of these, I have prepared and annotated bibliography, copies of which I'll be happy to share with researchers. And so it's just interesting, again, how some of these things, and we always hear in the UFO world how, we were looking at different countries and how we needed to try to beat them with our development of technologies. And it is really interesting to note also, and I just want to throw this in here because I've been doing research on all of this with regard to non-lethal weapons technologies and different things, that I have been very intrigued as of late by the work of Michael Persinger from Canada, who had developed the God helmet, which could induce different states in a person's mind. And I would definitely suggest that you look more into the research that he was doing and some of the links that he had with all of this, and it does all kind of weave into each other with all of this work and the people that were involved in this type of work over the past few decades. It is absolutely fascinating. And so now I'm going to take a little break, and then when I get back, I'm going to share with you one more paper, and then we are going to listen to a very candid interview, as I mentioned, of Anne Drufel, who was interviewing Bill Moore for her book Firestorm. That book is legendary. I have talked about it on different shows, and it was about the life and work of Dr. James McDonald, who was pushing boundaries in many, many different areas. And so Anne met Bill Moore, and they had a conversation. She asked for his insight and all sorts of things, and it was just a very insightful interview. And you can be, you can pretend like you're me and just be a fly on the wall, imagining this candid moment. We are going to take a quick break, and then I will be back. To UFO Classified, I am your host, Erica Lukes. Happy to be here, and I want to take a moment to give a big shout out to Mario for always being there for me. I mean, 6 years. He is an absolute saint. And all of you who get in there and who are in chat, ask great questions, value my guests. You are respectful and really the best of the best. And we just need so many more people like all of you who are looking into this subject, because as we know, and I say so much, this whole subject is just fraught with landmines and disinformation and dysfunctional behavior, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, some very alarming trends and with regard to racist behavior and what people are actually posting online, that it should be shot down pretty quickly. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, I had on Phil Leach last week, and there was quite a bit of uproar over some of his comments about mentioning the video of Michael Hall, where he is standing in front of the Proud Boys who stormed the Capitol. There are allegedly, I've not seen them, other videos where he is in the group headed towards the Capitol, where we know 5 people lost their lives in this insurrection and utter chaos and destruction. It was really not the best events, but more alarmingly, we are still seeing people in the UFO community who are basically calling in the apocalypse, who are high-ranking members of MUFON, who are out there participating in this stuff. And so I definitely encourage all of you to shine a spotlight on MUFON and some of the behaviors that we're seeing. This is not UFO research. This is not for the benefit of mankind. These are using organizations, non-for-profits, to promote really dangerous ideas, in my opinion. And it is not helpful to the study of UFOs. So there you have it. Again, I got to go there because this is so important. So I want to thank Phil for bringing up the fact that a MUFON board member was also there when this happened. And as I mentioned, other people involved in the organization who are now still online saying that there will be a reckoning and things that should be quite concerning to each and every one of us. On that note, you can go to UFOclassified.com to support the show and to also further research that I am doing and archiving and making sure that these precious archives, who people have spent their whole lives on, are going to a good place. They're getting digitized, and they will not be swept up and put into a hole where only a handful of researchers will have access to the information. And so that is really important. We know that there are places where archives are going, and yes, they're being archived, and they are going to be preserved at different universities and things. But for me, when I'm looking at a piece of history, I am telling you about it. You don't need to go to a university. You can hear about it every week on UFO Classified because I'm sharing this with you. And this is the type of stuff that people don't necessarily want to have out there, because it is my firm belief that there are those who are behind funding certain people and certain organizations who have a vested interest in sweeping up the data for purposes that are unknown. And at the end of the day, this subject is going to spin and spin and spin, and we're going to keep reinventing this wheel and not learn anything from it. And I think right now that is truly one of those things that has been happening, because now we've got a new group of people that appear out of nowhere, that get on their bully pulpits and abuse other people, and then also are promoting certain things that, again, in my opinion, are just disinformation. It is just like saying, hey, look over here, when the real stuff's going on over here. It ain't at Area 51. They haven't reversed any spacecraft, people. But, hey, let's look there, and then, we'll completely miss what's going on, which is definitely, like I say, what has happened. And so in the Drufel archives, I love them. Okay, there is a paper here from James T Westwood. I've been reading his papers. He's a very interesting fellow with an incredible background, and I want to just read this to you, because speaking of Area 51, this is quite interesting. So this is dated Wednesday, October 19th in 1994, and it says, Notes and Brief Chronology of the U.S. Government's Advanced Aircraft Test Facility, Groom Dry Lake, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. In parentheses, according to Federal Aviation Administration pilots' charts and U.S. Geological Survey topographic maps, this airbase doesn't exist. It's only a featureless dry expanse called Groom Lake in a remote valley between jagged mountain ranges situated some 120 miles north of Las Vegas. Old government maps listed as Area 51, and that is from Brown, page 52, 53 of his book. It goes on to say, late 1951, the U.S. Navy Civil Engineering Construction Battalion completes dismantling of an AEC test site and new construction of a permanent, partly underground test facility, heavily guarded and physically secured by United States Air Force Air Police. Several sources have reported up to 1,000 people working there concerned with UFO exploitation associated with Project Red Light. 1954, Groom Lake's role as a secret air base began in 1954 when the CIA gave Lockheed a contract to develop a spy plane that could fly higher than any aircraft yet built. The Soviet Union was to be the U-2's primary target. Groom Lake area first identified for testing the U-2 by its Lockheed test pilot, Tony LeVere. This is referenced in Brown again, page 58. Since 1954, no U.S. government agency will acknowledge any kind of base located in this area. And then it also mentions a publication date of Special Operations Manual, Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology Recovery and Disposal Field Manual, Top Secret, Magic Eyes Only, Disposal Field Manual, which contains specific instructions for shipping all recovered UFO-B hardware to Area 51. And there are other references as well. And then 1955, the CIA, with some help from Lockheed, picked the spot for the base. The modest facility was built in 55 under the direct control of the CIA and was accessible only by air, reference to Knapp, page 217. In the 1950s, members of Groom Lake, for whom the surrounding mountains are named, say the story of alien craft at Area 51 dates back to the 50s and was common knowledge among their neighbors in Lincoln County. UFOs stored at Area 51 from 53 after good and tests were conducted using conventional jet engines for power, again referencing Knapp. In 1962, the name Area 51 appeared on a map only once, a map that was prepared for the president, John Kennedy's visit to the test site. USGS aerial photographic image of Groom Lake is taken. 1984, Department of Air Force asserts physical control over 89,000 square acres of land on Groom Dry Lake, cutting off public access, which formerly could approach the rim of the lake itself. Base locations disappear from USGS maps. 1987, the acronym SAFE first appears in the address block of FOIA-released electrical messages about UFOs. It is always listed last in JCS information readdressal blocks of field-originated traffic and is associated with Autodine routing indicator Regulix, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. I'm just not the super savvy in the obviously the technology department, as you guys know. In 1988, William Moore tells Lear about the S4 site, and Lear adds it to his map. The reference to good here, page 170. December 1988, Robert Lazar begins occasional on-call work assignment at S4, and S4 is printed inter alia on his access badge. USSR imminent satellite takes photographic image of the same Groom Lake base image by USGS in 68. Significant additional new construction evident during the 20-year period. 91, late in 91, Landsat imagery reveals 3 large delta-shaped objects near the runway at the Groom Lake test site. 1993, September 30th, the Department of the Air Force initiates action to control additional 3,900 acres of former BLM-administered public land, including peaks of ridges and numerous observers over the previous years. And so here he also has just a section that says inferences and comments. Number 1, Groom Lake test site exists since 1951 to 55. Various U.S. government agencies, including the CIA, use it, probably administered by the U.S. Air Force. The site has been imaged in photography at least twice by satellite imagers and at least once by an aircraft imager. And then it says, 2, the entire facility supports several classified aerodynamic vehicle R&D programs, likely including spy planes of all types for UFO exploitation, reverse engineering and test flying. The UFO projects probably are subtended by classified, i.e. black conventional aircraft masks, and may contain budget funds for even blacker programs. With resource audits reflected by some FOIA-released attaché reports, it might be infeasible to further trace the resourcing of the UFO exploitation. And then number 3, old designator Area 51 probably equates to the entire rectangle called Dreamland on the north-central Nellis Ranges. S4 probably designates a quadrangle within Dreamland according to ordinary military base map column and row coordinate system. Each designated area of ranges, such as N21 or Coyote Alpha, probably map the same coordinate system for Dreamland rectangle. Only additional research and analysis would permit one to recite the coordinate system and register that. And then supports classified aeronautical R&D programs such as Senior Citizen, Senior Soda. Yay. And then number 4, it is of particular interest that analysis of attaché reports and the interpretation of this brief chronology both intimate the U.S. government DoD resources devoted to quote-unquote ufology dramatically increase from the mid-'80s. Of course, the expansion of Groom Lake site seen in imagery comparative of 68 and 1988 could be solely supportive of conventional aeronautical systems development alone. But this would not explain the expanded organizational resources devoted to UFOs seen in the message traffic from 1987. And lastly, number 5, it is mere speculation on the part of this writer that the relatively new organizational acronym SAFE equates to the meaning to the expanded name of the Groom Lake RDT&E site and might mean something as innocuous as Special Air Force Element. Equally, one might guess that SAFE equates to the Alien Technology Center organization discussed by Good. And so, again, that's just an interesting thing that you have here. And in other papers and work that I've read from him, it was his belief, from what I am gathering, that most of what we have seen, that is put forward, is an elaborate cover created to deflect away from black projects and from things that we have been testing and other governments have been testing for decades. And so could we be using the UFO subject to hide a lot of things? Yes, I think we are. And I think it's incredibly important to look at that. Like I said before, I just read that. I think it is important to note that when people are out there promoting Area 51 and reversed technology and all of these things, and then everybody's storming, doing the big storming Area 51, which was just embarrassing, actually, for multiple people that were there, I guess. But, you've got things like that, and it really just makes the whole field look just special. And it also, again, is a red herring. It's like the whole Skinwalker Ranch thing. It's like, oh, look over here. But in reality, what is going on is so much more complex, and it is not what they're telling you. And, you can definitely know that when you've got people that are coming forward, like Lou Elizondo and things with claims that we are really looking at UFOs, at the end of the day, you got to wonder about that. As I keep saying, and I know some of you are listening. So now we're going to go to, since we have been reading I've read to you the work of James T. Westwood. There's so much more. It's fascinating. I can't wait to learn more about this individual. But we're going to turn now to somebody that he does mention in his documents, and that person is Bill Moore, who has had a profound presence in the UFO topic. He was interested in UFOs. He was from a very early age. He wrote things like the Philadelphia experiment with Berlitz in '79, the Roswell UFO incident. I have in my archive work after work, just paper after paper from him. And there is no doubt that he put a lot of time and effort into things. I have had Greg Bishop on my show, who wrote the book Project Beta. He is friends with Bill Moore, and Bill Moore has obviously kind of shined away from the limelight. There were things with regard to the Benowitz affair and specific things, and then him coming out at a MUFON symposium talking about the fact that he knew that he was stepping into some things, and that he was getting the attention and working with people that might not have had the best interest at heart, but he wanted more information about it. And so then you've got the aviary, that were these key figures allegedly in the UFO movement. And in the first letter I wrote between Ann and James Westwood, specifically he says there that, again, this was just disinformation, that these people were, disinformation agents. And clearly I believe that to be absolutely the case. And so now I'm going to play you a little bit of that interview between Ann Drufel and Bill Moore. This is about the book Firestorm, and just imagine sitting there in a cafe. You can hear the people in the background and the chatter and different things, but listen to this, and then I want to know your comments and chat. It's fascinating. So here we go. Lord willing, with, the way I roll. So we're going to play this right now. This is from the Ann Drufel archive.
There, the mic. It should be recording now. It is. It's recording.
Very good.
Now it's going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got to thinking about that as I walked down there to get your batteries and come back. And I'm sure that it was in at least past the middle of November that this had to be. Because I have a memory of bare trees and the frost on the ground and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have had that in October.
No, you would have had the change of the leaves.
Yeah, there were no leaves at all on the trees. Anyway, this thing went literally up the river toward Newburgh. and I watched it for as long as it stayed in sight. And it just did its thing. I mean, it never varied from that. It was quite slow moving, too.
And you know, why wasn't there a government tracking system?
Well, who knows if there was or wasn't? There may have been.
In cooperation with the public. This is what McDonald always wanted, a public tracking system. You know, I put this in the book.
I remember calling, I called Dick Hall about it.
Uh-huh.
And I think probably the next morning, and talked to him about it. And I remember also typing up just a brief summary of it and sending it into NICAP.
Yeah.
Whatever became of that, I don't know. But the main batch of happenings was definitely in October, and there were, I don't know how many. There were a lot of them in that area.
And they were, I mean, investigated and found that they were no conventional explanations.
Well, the most interesting one that I looked into, I think I probably talked to half a dozen different people over half a dozen different sightings and so on. There was only one that was really, really interesting. And that involved a woman on her way home from work at night. And I can't even remember the name of the town she lived in now. It was maybe 20 miles from where I was, anyway. I went over in the car and talked to her. Spent quite a bit of time with her, really. She'd been coming along a road where, to her left, there was kind of a sunken field. The road was up on a kind of a berm or something, and then this pasture, as she called it, was below the level of the road and extended back to a line of trees. I went to the spot. I pictured the spot. May still have them. And as she came along around a curve in the road to this spot, she saw this. She had her car radio on, first of all. And the car radio started to go crazy. And she saw this object hovering at the far end of this field, right before the tree line. And she could see the trees behind it. So it was very, very low. It wasn't landed, but it was hovering only a few feet off the ground because the trees standing behind it, it was obstructing the trees. So if you're looking through it to the trees, which means, I think I figured out that it had to have been probably not more than 15 feet off the ground at the most. I remember doing some figuring about that. I don't remember how I came out with it.
Well, math.
I remember drawing angles and things on a piece of paper and trying to figure out. I'd taken a picture of the spot and was, playing around with a photograph trying to get angles and so on. And she said she stopped the car, but left the motor idle, and to look at this thing. And she said it then moved. I don't remember which direction she said it moved, but I remember her saying that it moved. Not toward her, but in some way. And when it moved, the motor in her car shut down.
When it moved?
Yeah.
Interesting.
When it moved, it shut the car off.
Interesting.
And that was one of the reasons I was so interested in this particular case, because of this effect.
Sure.
And she said she wasn't afraid of it, but she knew she shouldn't get out of the car. And at that time, nobody knew anything about missing time, and I've often wondered since whether there wasn't some missing time connected with this thing. But nobody knew to ask those questions at that time.
How big did the thing appear to her?
I figured out that this thing was probably between 30 and 40, as I recall, 30 and 40 feet, because of the way that she told me that where it was and what she could see behind it. That I remember sitting and playing with the angles and figuring that if it was in front of the trees and it was so many feet off the ground, then it had to be so many feet wide. And it was fairly good sized. And it was orangish yellow in color and football shaped. Glowing, bright, because this was after dark, but yet she could see the field lit up by it.
Was the glow general overall?
Yeah, she couldn't see anything behind the glow. But she said she sat and just watched this thing. She said she wasn't afraid. She was curious, but she knew she shouldn't get out of the vehicle. And there was quite a period of time, and it seems to me like 10 minutes or so that she felt she'd been watching this thing. And then it just took off.
Oh, it did.
It just took off. It went straight up.
Straight up.
And she described to me that she had rolled the window of the car down to look out the window to watch it as it went above the car. And it was, there were still leaves on the trees at that point. This was in the fall. Anyway, she went on home. The car would start it up again. There was no more interference to the radio or anything. And she, as I recall, it didn't live more than about a mile from the place. Because I went to her house and then we went out there, and it didn't take very long to get there. And then we went back to the house again. And she said when she got home, she told her daughter about this. And the daughter commented that she'd been having trouble with the radio at home at the same time.
Interesting.
And she wanted her daughter to go out there with her, to go back out there. And the daughter wouldn't go. She said, no, I'm not going to go back out there. I don't know what you saw, but I'm not going back out there. I don't want to go. I'm afraid. So she didn't go back out because her daughter wouldn't go with her. But she said she had this...
Why she was so fearful?
She had this feeling that she should go back there that night.
Oh, boy.
But she wouldn't go without her daughter going, and her daughter wouldn't go, so she didn't go back. Well, then I found 3 other people. It seems to me there were 3 people. I think there were 2 who had been together, and then there was another lady who had been driving along the road earlier, who lived like several doors away from this woman. This came up later. That this other woman had also seen something in that field, but didn't stop.
Really? About the same time?
Yeah, it was before this woman that I had talked to, just before her. But this didn't turn up until later, when she was talking around to her neighbors and whatnot, that this one neighbor said, well, you know, I came past that field too and saw something there, but it didn't stop. I don't remember the sequence of events, really, that led up to finding that other person, but I think I talked to 3 other people who had had some sort of an experience that night in that area with the same kind of a thing.
It's a good sighting. I never remember seeing that in the literature.
I wrote up a report. I sent it off to NICAP. I don't know whether it got into the investigator or not.
Probably not. You know, I sent them dozens and dozens of things over the years. They never printed one. Never printed one.
I don't remember whether it did or not, Ann.
I think they mentioned
I might even have gone back out there.
One.
I might even have gone back out there twice, that I think of it now, because the... well, I had to have gone back out there twice. I had to. Because I took photographs, and that was in the daytime, and the first time I went out was in the evening. And I talked to this woman the first time. It was like dark. And I took photos, so I must have gone back again. But I don't remember whether I talked to her again or whether I just went back to the spot, took
Did
pictures.
you figure out how close it was to the ground?
I figured out it had to be like 12 or 15 feet. I don't remember the figures. It's been so long ago. But I remember figuring out that it had to be very close to the ground because the trees were visible behind it and above it.
Is there any marks or any browning of vegetation or anything like that?
No. Not that I ever could find. I didn't recall, I don't think I looked real hard either.
So these things were around.
But there was quite a series
before the blackout.
Quite a series of events in that area before the blackout in October. And that's why Dick Hall called me, because I was in the area and because they were getting so many reports from that area. And could I go out and talk to some of these people?
And was this close to the Canadian substation where the first
clear at the other end of the state.
Tripped? Oh, it was.
Yeah. The substation was somewhere north of Niagara Falls, as I recall.
Yeah.
Way in the other end of New York.
A switch tripped or something, and they never could figure out why it did that. And then.
Yeah, but see, that was several hundred miles from where we were. We were nearer to we were within an hour of New York City. Like 45 minutes to drive down to New York City.
Well, you know, that blackout fascinated MacDonald, although he never spoke much about it. But privately, he would try to find out about it, you know.
But I never heard anything mentioned about objects in buildings, as it's, as it's in this paper here. It's the first time I've ever heard of that.
What paper is that?
In here, where he's looking at objects in the buildings.
Has something to do with Hitler?
Let's see here.
Oh, the New Yorker.
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't think Hynek ever did do that, do those interviews with those witnesses. There were 6 of them. New Yorker employees that saw this thing in the middle of the blackout. And it wasn't followed up. Well, probably was followed up, and then it went to the 11/27th. As you said.
Yeah, he said Hynek told him, too, about New Yorker observation of disc in buildings during blackout. It's the first I've ever heard of anything like that.
Yeah, there's more of it in the journal. How Quinton, he was speaking to Quintanilla about it, and Quintanilla said it had never been followed up. Very fascinating.
I never heard of that. The only time I'd ever run into anything even remotely like that had nothing to do with a blackout.
Now that should have been followed up, you know.
It certainly should have. I mean, that would be unusual enough that somebody should have looked into it.
6 employees of a well-known magazine, you know. These are reliable people. They wouldn't be pulling a joke.
New Yorker certainly had a reputation for being reasonably reliable. Well, let's see here. But anyway, I remember typing up and sending off material to NICAP on that whole New York flap. And that one particular case...
I'd like another cup of coffee.
That one particular case, I know I made some drawings from the photograph, included photographs in my calculations, and I took those back out, or sent them back out, to this lady to have her look at them for accuracy to see if that was correct. And it was. I think I went back out there, and it was in the daytime again.
Interesting case. Interesting.
30 years ago, to try to remember all that and thought of it in all that time. Don't remember the lady's name, don't remember the town she lived in. If I thought about it long enough or maybe looked at a map, I could remember
Oh,
it.
sure you would. Sure you would. And you could find it in your files, I'm sure.
I
Because
don't
we
think
don't
so.
throw
Those
things
are all
back.
gone.
They are gone?
Yeah.
What, were they burned?
No, when my marriage broke up, there were a couple of boxes of things that got lost in the process.
Oh.
And some things like that just are gone.
Oh, I see.
Especially some of the earlier stuff. There some things relating to Roswell in that box that I've never been able to find either.
Really? That early?
Well, it was just boxes, a couple of boxes of material that I had.
Uh-huh.
I've always assumed that some things that I never could find again had to have been in those boxes.
Well, sure.
You know, I had them and then I didn't have them, so.
Well, let's, it says, James Hughes phoned Colonel Bob Hippler. In other words, Hippler is looking for the university teams by credibility of university, not the people specifically. That's what that means. This journal, you know, he just abbreviated everything he could.
So find a university that has a good name that'll do the job you want without good people who might ask too many questions.
Well, no, this is when they were still looking for university teams to do the study. You know, teams in various universities.
Well,
they finally settled on one university.
That was early on they were going to do that.
This was early on, yeah. This was in 66. Okay, now this. What did you think about my Ratchford speculation?
I don't know anything about him.
Uh-huh. I mean,
he's a name that I've only heard in passing.
Uh-huh.
And I have no idea what to make about him. I think you're certainly within bounds of suspecting him based on what you have written there.
I mean, I'm not going too far. I mean, am I speculative
I don't think
enough?
You go too far.
Okay. In other words, I'm qualifying and speculating to the proper degree.
I don't think you go too far at all with it.
Okay.
I didn't think you went far enough, actually, because I noted toward the end there that you needed a paragraph to sort of summarize what you were saying. You found
really? Where would
you
that
found
be?
the Hippler thing here, right? There.
Yeah.
That's what I had on him.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he's still alive or not. But this is an exact verbatim of the notes. That's all I had on the notes from that telephone conversation was that much. That's all I got out of that guy.
What I could send is the page that has his name to that address to see if he'll communicate with me.
You can try it.
Uh-huh.
You can try it. He may be dead by now.
He may be.
You know, we tried to talk to him because his name came up in connection with some of the work that we were trying to get into with the Roswell thing.
Oh, really?
And his name popped up somewhere as being somebody who we might want to talk to. And
yes.
so
Yes.
I made an effort to talk to him. He wouldn't talk to me. And then I passed it off to somebody else in our group who made an effort but wouldn't talk to them either.
I really feel too full.
Thank you. Well,
This was at
Hitler's
I know how
side.
it came up. It came up in connection with the Crawford thing.
It did.
That's what I recall. It was during the time that I was looking into the Crawford business. That was 86.
Wow.
And Hitler's name
He's
came
sure
into that as
entwined,
being
isn't
somebody that I should look up, and that's what led to that.
Could we put Hitler aside just for a moment?
Sure.
You say this needs an extra paragraph. Could
I think
you?
I noted it there.
Oh, you did. Needs a paragraph to tie up theme. Who are possible?
Okay, so there you have it. That is just a little snapshot of, one of the many, many candid interviews that I have with the brilliant researcher Ann Drufel. This was a conversation that took place in 1995, and again, this is a portion of that. They sat down to talk about Firestorm and to get his opinion on that, and then obviously he's talking about personal experiences, and then interestingly enough, he mentions a couple of boxes of his most important material that went quote-unquote missing. Is that the case? Did that material go missing, or is that material perhaps in the hands of someone else? What happened there? but I definitely think there is something to follow up on in that regard. So I hope that you guys can go back and listen to this and re-listen to this. And I'm really glad, Peter, that you in chat you are mentioning that you're going to go back, because there's so many important elements to all of this. And even in the brilliant work that I read tonight from James T Westwood, where he was paid to go in and to go to different archives, to collect information, to do background investigations, to authenticate documents. And from what it sounds like, he was the real deal. And I just think all of this is fascinating, because as we know, people that have been in this for a while, or people that are getting into it, you see specific people that pop up time and time again. And we've seen this with the members of the quote-unquote aviary, or whatever we want to call these people, disinformation agents. They've come up time after time, and it really it is interesting to have this history, to see the correspondence between some of these people. And it's absolutely fascinating. And so I want to just take a moment, and then, because we're talking about the aviary, we're talking about different people and disinformation, all sorts of things that we have seen take place. And I want to just end by reading a document, and this is it's about 6 pages, but to me this again was in the Drufel files. But I think that this really highlights some things, and this also gives you as investigators good leads to go out there and do some research. And this is a summary of notes taken by Jim Mccampbell. This is dated 9/10/85, concerning 2 telephone interviews with Dr. Paul Benowitz. This is side A of the cassette. And it says, this is Jim Mccampbell making a recording of a remarkable episode on July 13th, 1984. It has to do with the UFO-based cattle mutilations, advanced weaponry, contact with aliens, etc. The episode began about a week ago when I received a little semi-annual periodical titled Stigmata. It is number 21, the first half of 84. This little bulletin is prepared by Thomas Adams in Paris, Texas. He has a rather lengthy article. One finds points of interest on page 9, I suppose. And the only way to pursue it is to read what is here, and his fundamental quoting in May of 1980, a most interesting event occurred in northern New Mexico. An event similar in many respects to the Doherty case. A mother and a young son were driving on a rural highway near Cimarron, New Mexico. They observed 2 or more craft. As Judy Doherty did, they observed a calf being abducted. Both observers were themselves abducted and taken on separate craft to what was apparently an underground installation. The woman witnessed a mutilation in the field. It has been alleged that she also observed a vat containing unidentified body parts floating in liquid, and another vat containing a male human. The woman was subjected to an examination, and it has been further alleged that the small metallic objects were implanted into her body as well as her son's. More than one source has confirmed that CAT scans have confirmed the presence of these implants. Paul Benowitz, president of his own scientific company in Albuquerque and an investigator in the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, has been the principal interviewer in this case. In April 1983, Benowitz reports that he, through regressive hypnosis of the mother and child and his own follow-up investigations, including communications received, he was able to determine the location of the underground facility, a kilometer underground beneath the Jacqueria Apache Indian Reservation in Dulce, New Mexico. And it says, since 1976, one of the areas of the U.S. hardest hit by mutilations, interestingly, coincidentally, or whatever. Benowitz's information is that the installation is operated jointly as part of an ongoing program of cooperation between the U.S. government and extraterrestrial UFO knots. The story continues that after the initial contacts years ago, the aliens agreed to give us certain technological advances while we provided them with a location. The New Mexico base and at least 3 others, plus the aliens, were allowed to carry out certain operations, abductions, mutilations without our interference. The mother and son, by the way, returned back to their car that night. And I want to just interject here because it is interesting. When I was doing some research and interviewed a person that is quite well known in the UFO world, and I can talk a little bit more about that. I'll find my notes. But interestingly enough, this same story played out right outside of Dugway. How fascinating. Whether it's true or whether this is just a story inserted into the narrative, we'll just make a guess on that one. And then it says, I've been studying the idea of bases for aliens for some time. This caught my attention and suspected the cooperation between U.S. government and the aliens. It also gives the name and location of the man who has his own scientific operation, Dr. Paul Benowitz. So here we go. I got in touch with Dr. Benowitz by telephone and indicated that I had seen reference to him in his work. I wanted to find out whether he was being misrepresented or whatever. I told him I would Xerox a copy of it and forwarded it to him for comments, which I did. This morning, July 13th, 1984, he telephoned me and said that he would have, having looked over the article, found that it was substantially correct. I forgot to mention that in my letter to him, I said that none of the details that were in this particular article gave me any strain. Then Benowitz, who I will refer to as Paul, he took time to close the door to his office and elaborated on the whole story, and the conversation lasted somewhere near an hour. It was rather mind-boggling. Here is the substance of the conversation. The article is basically accurate, and he does have the coordinates of the base. He is a physicist, and he started 4 years ago to determine in his own mind whether UFOs exist or do not, and he has gotten much more deeply involved than he ever intended. It has caused him a great deal of trouble from the government intelligence groups. He has pictures from the location. He went with a highway patrol officer, and they saw a UFO take off from the Mesa location. He obtained photographs that he calls launch ships that were about 330 feet long, 130 feet across. The cattle rancher named Gomez, and he went back to this location, which is a mesa, and saw a surveillance vehicle, which was 5 feet by 10 feet, like a satellite, he said. He had been using a Polaroid camera, and then he got the Hasselblad to produce much better pictures. He set up a monitoring station and observed UFOs all over the area. He was able to pick up signals and obtain video pictures that are transmissions from the aliens on their screens. He has been dealing heavily with a Major Edwards, a security commander at Manzano Security, and says, my wife and two of them saw 4 objects outside the warhead storage range, about 2,500 feet, and obtained movies of them. He now has 6,000 feet of movie footage, of which 5,000 is in Super 8. The objects have the ability to cloak. That is his words. Spells cloak, C-L-O-A-K, like cloak and dagger, like cover up, and he says they can cause themselves to go invisible by a field that causes the light waves to bend around the object one sees, the sky behind them. He confirmed the fact that a woman was picked up when she accidentally observed the calf being abducted. He has paid for pathology work and a medical doctor work. The pathologist is former head of the microbiology department of the New Mexico University. Again, they've done CAT scans. There is no ESP involved in this, but they send down, not beam down. They have a beam through which they can sense her thoughts. They can communicate through this beam. She picked up their transmissions. He devised a means of communication based on her ASKIL code. 1 is equal to no and 2 being yes. Through this code, he's been able to talk to the aliens. He then computerized the system that would reject extraneous inputs. He said that they can be very threatening or malevolent. One of them he talked to said he would drop off communication if he became too familiar. He was told about the base. He was then told about the OSI of the Air Force, and he did give, and had been requested to give several presentations to a high-level Air Force group in briefings on the subject, Wing Level Command, and many others, fellows at Edwards. He took a helicopter to the site. It turned out, that's a no twice to the site. Second, with a Colonel Carpenter, wing commander, after the presentation that the fellow made, then they took the helicopter to the site and made photographs. He says you can see one of the saucers on the ground, They use small vehicles and have no wheels. They don't show up in color because they are highly reflective, but in black and white they are visible. He says that they are beam weapons that are floating in strategic locations, and there is a road into the base. He obtained infrared photos of the area from an altitude of 1,400 feet. There is a level highway going into the area that is 36 feet wide. It is a government road. One can see telemetry trailers and buildings that are 5-sided buildings with a dome. There are many guards. Also, there's blue vans, CIA vehicles. He's been cautioned about limousines as they'll run you off the road. And there are 2 wrecked ships allegedly there that are 36 feet with wings. One can see oxygen and hydrogen tanks. 4 cylindrical objects, Socorro type. And the doors, let's see, the Cash Landrum case was one of these cases. The doors are jammed open and neutron radiation came out. They are based at Kirkland and Holloman Air Force Base in someplace in Texas. He said the government is paying the hospital bills for the Cash Landrum victims. Refueling of plutonium is accomplished at Los Alamos. He traced pictures of this back to 1948. Pictures in 62, you can see many saucers at the base and trucks. The road was passed off to the local inhabitants as a lumber contract. He has photographs of the firing of a beam weapon that projects in 2 directions. He has computed the speeds of flying saucers at 1,500 miles and indicates pilots of ours from the NSA, National Security Agency. The aliens have atomic propulsion systems they've had for 48 years, and the saucers themselves operate on an electric charge having to do with crystal semiconductor, maybe a superlattice. He thinks as you increase the voltage, the current goes down. At present, there's 6 to 8 vehicles, or maybe 10 in the area. He says that some 6 come from different cultures, the Zeta Reticuli cultures, and others. The flying saucers are limited to operation in the atmosphere. The cattle mutilation problem, the aliens are using DNA from cattle and are remaking humanoids. And so I want to interject here because, here we have this typical myth that has been promoted time and time again by researchers that we could name, but you all know them. And they've been promoting this kind of stuff, even though we have people on record saying that we are responsible for the cattle mutilation. So I just want to throw that in there. But again, it's the same myth that he has been unfortunately manipulated with. And then it goes on to say in 79 something happened. The base was closed. There was an argument over weapons, and our people were chased out. 100 people were involved. Regarding abductions of people, they pick out medium to low IQ personnel. They're able to scope out each one. We can do the same thing with the electromagnetic spectrum analyzers. They pick up these people and then put implants into them, take tissue samples, including ovum from the women's sperm, from men, and DNA. They can program these people as slaves to do whatever they wish and will have no memory of it. The hardcore type staunchly refuse to be x-rayed or hypnotically regressed. You can recognize them because of their eyes. They have a funny smile. Hynek knows all about this and has been in contact with Coral Lorenzen. He regards Hynek as a threat. At his house, he showed Hynek films, and out in the backyard a flying saucer. He asked Hynek about his view with regard to abductions as to how many people might have been abducted. Hynek unhesitatingly said 1 out of 40. He said that many people come to his door to see him just out of the blue, and he sees scars on their backs and necks, that previously old scars are easy to detect and that new ones are hard to detect. He feels that this is a sickening situation. The aliens have gone wild and use hypodermics. Mccampbell, I don't know what that means, and then he says he's been paralyzed 4 times and hit 250 times by hypodermics. He also goes on to say a man came to see him with a top secret document from the 50s, indicating that if anybody found out about all of this, that they would kill him. He was asked, does that bother you? He said, no, it didn't. He said he sent the film to Kodak. There were 7 rolls. and they could not be processed locally, so they had to go to Kodak. There have been indirect threats by Air Force intelligence against him. And the next thing, discussing the trade-off here, is what they got. We got atomic technology, atomic flying ships, several of them. The first one was wrecked on the ground. Apparently the last one was repaired and is in Houston near the Cache Landrum site. The second item was that we get out of it are the beam weapons, the beam technology. The third is the thought beam, that means by which communication is accomplished. It is an electrostatic in character with a magnetic component and is the only way of communicating with people. They have implants in order to use it. So this goes on and on again and mentions a blue light, mentions different people in the government, as we know, that were coming to him. We have, in one episode that I did recently, actually somebody saying that there were reports that Hynek actually took a computer to Benowitz, and it was on that computer that allegedly this secret code started coming to him, and he began communicating. And so in the end, towards the end of all of this really interesting, this interesting conversation that was recorded, Benowitz felt that at the end of the day that he was being stalked and harassed and intimidated. Obviously, he was fed information, disinformation, and it truly is just one of those things. You sit back and you look through this and you see how easily it is to kind of manipulate the subject and to insert this, but then when you look back at what potentially, well, that we actually have known documentation for of what we were experimenting with, and now the fact that we have voice-to-skull technology that is going to be sold commercially, where you can watch, you can see, you can get this, you can play a freaking movie in your mind with no interface. And you know that we've got all of these things. You know that we have plasma weapons. You know that we've created all of these different things. And then you see the way that the UFO subject has been manipulated and these things have been put forward. And you look back at all these cases and put together things. You just think, holy cow. It really, really, really is shocking, stupefying, intriguing, but we'll just see where this goes. So again, we're coming up on the end of the show, but I want to again give my love and gratitude to Anne Drufel's family for bestowing the honor of me to preserve her work and to get information out to the public. I will continue to do so, and I want to thank the people that are Patreons to my show, because without you, this work would not be possible. And I really feel it's important for all of us. You can go to UFO Classified to pledge your support, and I appreciate all of you that have done that. Thank you so much. I also want to say that get up there and hit the follow button on Spreaker and make sure you get information out there. I need all of your help. Again, thank you so much for listening and for supporting me. Make sure you guys stay safe, and also make sure that each and every one of us, we understand we need to clean this field up. This is an important subject. We are going to do this. This should be a subject about discovery. We shouldn't be talking about politics. We shouldn't be talking about hate. We shouldn't be talking about all of these things, but unfortunately we are, because it's important to clean it up and then get to work. That's what we're doing. Thank you so much, all of you. I love you guys. Please be safe, and go to UFO Classified to catch up on things. Hopefully MJ will be on, but we'll see. So you guys be safe. I'm Erica Lukes. Have a wonderful weekend.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's he's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So